Imagine sitting on a weathered timber bench at the edge of a dusty track in the Australian outback. Around you, the vast red earth stretches to the horizon under a searing sun, the air thick with the scent of eucalyptus and the dry crunch of spinifex grass. Suddenly, out from the shimmering heat haze of the bush, a heavy, muscular shadow bounces into view. It stops a few meters away, rises to its full height on two massive hind legs, balances on an impossibly thick tail, and stares you dead in the eye with a calm, calculating gaze. This is the red kangaroo, known scientifically as Osfranta rufus, an animal so synonymous with Australia that its silhouette is stamped on our currency and painted on the wings of our aircraft. It is an evolutionary masterpiece that has conquered the harsh, arid interior of the Australian continent, survived brutal ice ages, shaped the indigenous history of this land for tens of thousands of years, and yet today faces a quiet, shifting crisis in the changing ecosystems of modern Australia. Most people look at this animal and see a quirky national symbol, a bouncing caricature. That is a massive mistake. Behind that familiar, rustic red coat lies a biological marvel that can outrun a professional cyclist, survive months without drinking a single drop of liquid water, and manipulate its own reproductive system in ways that defy basic mammalian biology. To truly understand the red kangaroo is to understand how life adapts when pushed to the absolute limit of survival. Over the course of this exploration, we are going to dive into 100 incredible truths about this creature. And by the time we reach the middle, your understanding of this iconic marsupial will be completely turned upside down. Let us begin with the first reality. A kangaroo is not just a kangaroo. When we talk about this creature, we are discussing the largest living marsupial on Earth, but its deep evolutionary lineage places it within the family Macropodidae, which literally translates from Latin as big foot. For centuries, early European explorers who first stepped onto the coast of Australia scrambled to classify it, comparing it to everything from giant mice to deer that hopped on two legs. But the red kangaroo stands entirely apart from the smaller grey kangaroos of the eastern forests or the wallaroos of the Rocky Ranges. It is the undisputed king of the open plains, a specialist of the interior that has evolved a lifestyle perfectly tuned to the unique rhythms of the Australian environment. Its scientific name, Osfranta rufus, speaks directly to its identity, with rufus meaning red in Latin. It was officially described in the early 19th century as scientists began to realise just how deep the connection between this animal and the Australian soil truly was. This species cannot thrive in dense, wet jungles or subtropical rainforests. It belongs to the open savanna, the scrublands, and the vast desert plains of the red centre. It is an animal completely dependent on the immense, unyielding spaces of Australia. If you remove the massive expanses of the open bush, the red kangaroo simply ceases to exist in its natural state. They do not merely live in the outback. The outback is their entire biological blueprint. Consider their sheer physical presence across the Australian continent. The red kangaroo holds one of the most extensive geographic distributions of any large mammal in Australia, roaming across millions of square kilometres from the arid fringes of Western Australia, through the blistering deserts of South Australia and the Northern Territory, all the way to the pastoral plains of Queensland and New South Wales. Wherever the rainfall is low and the summers are unforgiving, you will find them. They are a highly mobile, nomadic species, perfectly adapted to a land where resources are never guaranteed in one place for long. They are a truly continental presence, tied explicitly to the erratic weather systems that govern Australia. Look at the sheer scale of a mature male, often called a boomer or a big red. A massive male can stand over 2 meters tall when fully upright, making him comfortably taller than the average human. From the tip of his nose to the end of his thick, muscular tail, he represents an extraordinary feat of natural engineering. Yet, despite this towering stature, a large male typically weighs between 66 and 90 kilograms. It is an incredibly lean, efficient build. There is no wasted mass, no unnecessary fat, just dense, explosive muscle and elongated bone wrapped in dense fur. Designed to move across vast distances with the absolute minimum amount of energy expended to support this nomadic lifestyle in the blistering heat of the Australian interior. The kangaroo possesses a cardiovascular system that functions like a high-performance engine. At rest, a red kangaroo's heart beats at a steady, controlled pace, but the moment it accelerates into a high-speed hop, the heart rate spikes dramatically, pumping oxygen-rich blood directly to the massive tendons and muscles of the hind legs. Because these animals live in a hot, arid climate where temperatures frequently soar past 40 degrees Celsius, their metabolism must be incredibly efficient. They are biological machines fine-tuned to conserve energy, managing their internal temperature through specialized blood vessels in their forelimbs, which they lick to cool down via evaporation when the midday heat becomes oppressive. Watch how they move across the claypans and through the salt bush. A red kangaroo does not walk. It bounds with a rhythmic, elastic grace that is entirely unique to the macropods of Australia. If you watch a mob of kangaroos moving across a paddock, you will see they cannot move their hind legs independently on the ground. They must propel themselves forward using both legs simultaneously. This hopping motion, known as saltation, is an evolutionary triumph. Inside those long hind legs are massive, rubber-like tendons that store elastic strain energy with every single downward landing. As the kangaroo hits the ground, the tendons compress, capturing the kinetic energy and bouncing the animal back into the air like a giant living pogo stick. The faster they hop, the more efficient they become, allowing them to traverse the endless Australian horizons without burning through their precious energy reserves across the wider Australian landscape. There are dozens of different macropod species, from tiny rock wallabies hiding in the gorges of the top end to the heavy-set eastern grey kangaroos grazing in the coastal valleys. But the red kangaroo remains the ultimate expression of this group. Within this single species, scientists recognise subtle variations in coat colour and size, depending on the specific region they inhabit. In the more humid eastern fringes of their range, some individuals take on a distinct smoky blue hue, while those enduring the furnace of the central deserts exhibit the classic, vibrant brick red coloration that reflects the iron-rich soils of the outback itself. The visual distinction between the sexes is stark and serves a vital purpose within the social structure of the mob. The males are typically the ones boasting the fierce red coats, broad chests, and heavily muscled forearms, which they use for wrestling matches to establish dominance. The females, affectionately known as blue flyers, are significantly smaller, sleeker, and typically sport a stunning silver-grey coat with hints of blue. This lighter, muted coloration provides exceptional camouflage against the pale green of the saltbush and the shimmering grey of the midday heat haze, keeping them and their vulnerable offspring safe from predators scanning the open plains. Unlike many large mammals globally, the red kangaroo does not undertake traditional seasonal migrations along fixed geographical routes. They do not leave the burning plains when winter approaches, nor do they flee to the coastal rivers when summer peaks. They stay put on the Australian continent, weathering the extremes right where they are. When a prolonged drought grips the landscape and the ground turns to dust, their strategy is not to flee across mountains, but to shift nomadically, following the scent of distant rainstorms that might trigger a sudden flush of green grass 50 kilometres away. They are permanent residents of the extreme, bound to the unpredictable shifts of the Australian sky. To survive in the unforgiving heart of Australia, the red kangaroo has evolved a reproductive strategy that sounds closer to science fiction than terrestrial biology. It revolves around a phenomenon known as embryonic diapause, a biological pause button that allows a female kangaroo to effectively freeze the development of an embryo inside her womb. When a dominant male mates with a female, the resulting fertilized egg develops to a microscopic stage of about 100 cells and then completely stops growing. It enters a state of dormancy, waiting for the precise environmental cues that signal it is safe to enter the world. This means a single female can simultaneously carry 3 separate generations of offspring at various stages of development: a dormant embryo in her uterus, a tiny, blind joey attached to a teat inside her pouch, and an older youth, known as a joey at foot, operating just outside the pouch but still returning to drink milk. This extraordinary reproductive flexibility is a direct evolutionary response to the erratic climate of the Australian continent, where a devastating drought can last for years, followed by sudden torrential floods that transform the outback into a lush oasis overnight. If the environment becomes completely barren and food supplies dry up, the mother's body will naturally cease milk production, causing the joey in the pouch to perish. Instantly, the dormant embryo inside her womb awakens and begins to develop, ensuring that the moment conditions improve, a new generation is already on the way. Conversely, during periods of abundant rain and plentiful green feed, the female can produce two entirely different types of milk from adjacent teats within the exact same pouch. One teat supplies high-fat, energy-dense milk tailored specifically for the large joey at foot, while the other produces a completely different biochemical formulation rich in sugars and proteins to sustain the tiny, newly arrived newborn. The journey of that newborn joey is one of the most harrowing and miraculous transitions in the animal kingdom. When the young Osfranta rufus is born, it is not a fully formed animal, but a tiny, pink, hairless creature barely the size of a single jelly bean, weighing less than a single gram. It possesses no eyes, no hind legs, and no tail to speak of, yet it must survive a treacherous trek entirely on its own. Guided solely by a deeply ingrained instinct and a keen sense of smell, this microscopic creature uses its disproportionately strong, clawed forelimbs to crawl through its mother's thick fur, navigating a path from the birth canal up to the opening of the pouch. The mother assists only by licking a path through her fur to ease the journey, but she cannot pick the infant up or guide it with her paws. For a creature that resembles little more than an embryo, this climb across several centimeters of exposed skin is the equivalent of scaling a sheer cliff face in a howling gale once inside the safety of the pouch. The tiny joey immediately locates one of the 4 available teats and latches on. The tip of the teat swells significantly inside the young animal's mouth, fusing them together so securely that the joey cannot be dislodged, even if the mother bounds across the Australian plains at maximum speed to escape danger. For the next 5 to 6 months, the pouch becomes the joey's entire universe, providing a climate-controlled, sterile environment where it can slowly grow its eyes, develop its rich coat of fur, and construct the powerful skeletal system that will one day propel it across the bush. It is not until around the 200-day mark that the young kangaroo first musters the courage to poke its head out of the pouch. Gazing across the expansive landscape of Australia for the very first time, even as they grow larger and begin to explore the world outside on their own feet, the bond between the mother and her joey remains intensely physical. When alarmed by a distant sound or the shadow of a wedge-tailed eagle soaring high above the Mitchell grass plains, the joey will sprint back toward its mother and dive headfirst into the pouch, leaving its long hind legs and tail dangling out in a comical display of panicked clumsiness before executing a synchronized somersault to right itself inside. This intense investment in rearing requires immense energy from the female, who must constantly forage through the harsh Australian daylight to find enough moisture-rich vegetation to sustain both her own high metabolism and the relentless demands of her growing offspring. The social structure that governs these animals across the vast open spaces of Australia is highly fluid and dynamic. Red kangaroos gather in social groups known as mobs, which can range from a few individuals to more than 100 during times of drought, when they congregate around precious, surviving waterholes or isolated patches of green feed. Unlike the rigid, permanent packs of some terrestrial predators, a kangaroo mob is an open society with a shifting membership. Individuals join and leave as they please, wandering through the landscape based on their immediate survival needs. Within these mobs, however, a strict hierarchy exists among the males, dictated entirely by physical prowess, size, and age. The largest, most battle-scarred boomer claims the highest rank, securing exclusive mating rights with the receptive females in the area, but his position is never permanent. He is constantly monitored by younger, ambitious males waiting for any sign of weakness or injury to challenge his dominance in brutal, highly ritualized wrestling matches that can echo across the quiet outback nights as powerful bodies clash in the dust. These ritualized wrestling matches are not mere scuffles. They are intense, highly athletic contests of strength that resemble human kickboxing matches played out on the red clay of the Australian outback. When two large male boomers square off over territory or access to females, they rise to their absolute full height, balancing their massive bodies precariously on the tips of their powerful hind toes and using their thick, muscular tails as a steady third leg. They begin by locking their forearms together, pushing and shoving like heavyweight wrestlers, testing each other's upper body strength. The real danger, however, arrives when one male decides to strike. Leaning his entire body weight back onto his tail, he launches both hind legs off the ground simultaneously, driving his massive feet forward into his opponent's chest or abdomen. Each foot is armed with a long, dagger-like central claw that can easily slash open flesh, meaning these battles require immense physical resilience to endure, to protect themselves from these devastating blows. Male red kangaroos have evolved a remarkably thick, leathery hide across their chest and belly, acting as a natural suit of armor against the worst of the slashes. These contests are essential for establishing the social verticality of the mob, ensuring that only the strongest, most genetically resilient individuals pass on their traits to the next generation of Australian marsupials. Yet, despite this capacity for intense violence, the red kangaroo is fundamentally a peaceful, gentle herbivore that prefers to spend the blistering heat of the Australian day resting quietly beneath the sparse shade of a mulga tree or a rocky overhang, conserving every ounce of moisture and energy it can, as specialised grazers. Their digestive system is beautifully adapted to process some of the toughest, most fibrous vegetation found anywhere on the Australian continent. They feed primarily on native grasses, chenopod shrubs, and the resilient leaves of the saltbush, which are often packed with abrasive silica and complex cellulose that would defeat the stomach of most ordinary mammals. Like cows and sheep, kangaroos are chambered stomach fermenters, relying on a complex colony of specialized bacteria in their forestomach to slowly break down the plant matter through fermentation. However, unlike ruminants, kangaroos produce virtually no methane gas as a byproduct of this process. Their gut chemistry is incredibly clean and efficient, a trait that has caught the attention of modern climate scientists in Australia, who are studying the kangaroo's unique microbiome to understand how to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in domestic livestock. This highly efficient digestive architecture means a red kangaroo can extract the maximum possible nutritional value from a handful of dry spinifex grass that would offer zero sustenance to an introduced European animal. Their water conservation tactics are equally legendary across the arid zones of Australia. During a typical season, a red kangaroo can go for days, or even weeks, without drinking direct surface water, obtaining almost all its required hydration from the moisture locked inside the dew-kissed grass blades they consume in the pre-dawn hours. When water becomes entirely scarce during a classic outback drought, they will use their powerful clawed forepaws to dig deep into dry riverbeds, excavating soakages up to a metre deep to access clean, filtered water hidden beneath the sand, creating lifelines not just for themselves, but for dozens of other native bird and reptile species sharing the ecosystem. This profound ecological integration means the red kangaroo acts as a vital engineer for the Australian environment. As they hop rhythmically across the landscape, their large, soft-padded feet gently disturb the ancient crusty topsoil without compacting it, creating tiny, shallow depressions where wind-blown seeds and sparse rainwater can collect. This natural aeration process encourages the germination of native flora, helping to rejuvenate the delicate arid ecosystems that cover more than 70% of Australia. Unlike the heavy, hard-hooved sheep and cattle introduced by European settlers, which can systematically destroy the fragile topsoil and accelerate desertification, the kangaroo has spent millions of years refining a movement profile that keeps the Australian landscape healthy, functional, and resilient against erosion. Yet, this harmonious balance was fundamentally altered with the arrival of modern agricultural practices across the Australian continent. The introduction of vast pastoral networks, the clearing of dense scrub for sheep grazing, and the establishment of thousands of artificial boreholes and cattle troughs across the interior created an artificial abundance of water and food in regions that were once completely hostile. For a highly adaptable species like Osfranta rufus, this sudden transformation of the outback into a permanent pastoral buffet triggered a massive population boom in certain sectors, bringing them into direct, intense conflict with the expanding agricultural industries of modern Australia. Today, the management of kangaroo populations is one of the most complex, fiercely debated environmental topics within the nation. Farmers often view the large mobs as economic competitors that overgraze the fragile pastures, damage expensive fencing, and deplete critical water reserves during times of hardship, leading to highly regulated commercial harvesting programs aimed at stabilising their numbers. Navigating this intersection between ancient ecological heritage and modern economic reality remains a profound challenge for conservationists and policymakers alike, proving that even the most successful and iconic species on the Australian continent must constantly navigate the shifting, unpredictable footprint of human civilization. Observing these magnificent creatures in their natural habitat requires a deep sense of humility and a profound respect for the delicate rhythms of the Australian bush. When you sit quietly on that weathered timber bench and watch a massive male Osfranta rufus lift his head to catch your scent on the evening breeze, you are witnessing a living link to the ancient prehistoric past of the Australian continent. This is not an animal that needs to be approached, touched, or fed for a superficial tourist photograph. The ethics of wildlife observation in Australia demand that we remain silent witnesses, maintaining a respectful distance that allows these highly sensitive marsupials to go about their daily routines of foraging, grooming, and resting without the inducing stress of human intrusion. Entering their space with quiet reverence ensures that the wild, untamed spirit of the outback remains completely uncompromised when we look out across the red plains of Australia today. We must recognise that the red kangaroo is much more than a striking image on a postcard or a quirky national emblem. It is a biological mirror reflecting the health, resilience, and ultimate survival of the entire Australian interior. For tens of thousands of years, this species has moved in perfect, synchronised harmony with the boom and bust cycles of this ancient land, adapting with an elegant complexity that leaves modern evolutionary biologists in absolute awe. They have outlasted the dramatic shifts of the Pleistocene ice ages, navigated the profound modifications of the landscape brought about by both indigenous firestick farming and European agriculture, and they continue to endure amidst the mounting pressures of a rapidly changing global climate. As the late afternoon sun dips below the horizon, painting the vast outback sky in brilliant fiery strokes of molten gold and deep violet, the red kangaroo mob begins to move. One by one, their heavy, muscular silhouettes rise from the shadows of the mulga trees, bounding across the crimson earth with that effortless, elastic grace that has defined the open spaces of Australia for millions of years. They disappear slowly into the vastness of the bush, their rhythmic thumping fading into the quiet rustle of the evening breeze through the spinifex. They leave behind nothing but soft, shallow tracks in the dust. A fleeting reminder that we are merely temporary visitors in a timeless landscape completely ruled by the undisputed king of the open plains.